Imagine an army of hundreds of thousands of soldiers marching through a frozen forest, fully armed, heavily equipped, confident that victory is only days away. Now imagine that somewhere in that endless white wilderness, hidden beneath the snow and trees, a single silent figure is waiting. No radio, no advanced equipment, no sniper scope. Just a rifle, patience, and an understanding of the cold that few humans could survive. One by one, soldiers begin to fall, and panic spreads through the invading army. They cannot see their enemy. They cannot hear him. They only know one thing. Somewhere in the snow, death is watching. This is the story of the man they began to fear more than an entire army. The man the Soviet soldiers would eventually call Simo Häyhä, a quiet farmer from Finland who would become the deadliest sniper in human history. But the most fascinating part of this story is not just the number of soldiers he eliminated. It is how he did it, how he survived the brutal Arctic conditions, and why an entire invading army became terrified of a single invisible man hiding in the snow. To understand the legend of the White Death, we must go back to the winter of 1939, when Europe was already falling into chaos. Nazi Germany had begun its expansion across the continent, and the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, was determined to expand its own borders for security. Finland, a small Nordic country with a population of barely 4 million people, suddenly became the target of one of the largest military powers in the world. On November 30, 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland, launching what would become known as the Winter War. The Soviets believed the war would be quick. They deployed nearly 500,000 soldiers, thousands of tanks, and massive artillery units. Finland, by comparison, had a much smaller army and far fewer resources. But Finland had something the Soviets underestimated: a deep knowledge of the land, unmatched survival skills in extreme cold, and soldiers who were used to living and hunting in forests where winter temperatures could drop below -40°C. Among those soldiers was a quiet man from a rural village in Simo Häyhä. Before the war, he was not a professional soldier. He was a farmer and a hunter who spent most of his life in the forests of Finland. Hunting in the harsh Nordic wilderness had taught him patience, silence, and precision. When winter arrived, the forests became almost completely silent, and survival depended on understanding every small sound and movement. These skills would soon turn him into something the Soviet army was completely unprepared for. When the war began, he joined the Finnish army as a sniper. Unlike many snipers today, who rely on advanced scopes and technology, he used a simple bolt-action rifle, the Mosin-Nagant M28/30. What made this even more surprising was that he refused to use a telescopic scope. Most people assume a sniper needs a scope to be effective, but he deliberately avoided one. There were several reasons for this. A scope could reflect sunlight and reveal the sniper's position. It also forced the shooter to raise their head slightly, making them easier to spot. By using simple iron sights, he could stay lower in the snow and remain nearly invisible. But that was only one part of his strategy. To hide himself in the snow, he wore full white camouflage, blending perfectly into the frozen landscape. He would pack snow in front of his rifle barrel so that the blast from the gun would not scatter loose powder and reveal his location. He even placed snow in his mouth, so that the warm breath leaving his body would not create visible vapor in the freezing air. Then he would wait, sometimes 4 hours, sometimes for an entire day, completely still, watching, listening. The forests of Finland during winter are incredibly quiet. In those conditions, a small movement or sound can travel long distances. He used this silence like a hunter stalking prey. When Soviet soldiers moved through the forests, they often followed roads or narrow paths between the trees. From hidden positions, he could observe them long before they knew he was there. Then a single shot would break the silence, and another soldier would fall. At first, Soviet commanders assumed they were dealing with small groups of Finnish snipers. But reports began to come in from different units describing the same terrifying pattern. Soldiers would suddenly collapse without warning, often hundreds of meters away from the nearest visible enemy. Soon rumors began spreading among the Soviet troops. They believed there was a ghost in the forest, an invisible sniper who could appear anywhere. They began calling him Belaya Smrt, which translates to White Death. The name spread quickly through the Soviet ranks, and the fear grew. The Soviet army tried everything to stop him. They sent counter-snipers into the forests, hoping to locate his firing position. They fired artillery into areas where they suspected he might be hiding. Entire patrols were assigned to hunt the mysterious sniper who was silently dismantling their forces. But finding Häyhä was almost impossible. The forests were vast, the snow was deep, and the Finnish soldiers knew how to move through the terrain on skis with incredible speed and silence. Meanwhile, he continued his work, day after day, shot after shot. By the end of the Winter War, he had recorded over 500 confirmed sniper kills. Some historians estimate that the true number may be even higher when including soldiers eliminated using his submachine gun in close combat. This would make him the most lethal sniper ever recorded in military history. And yet, despite the legend growing around him, he remained an incredibly humble man. He did not consider himself a hero or a legend. When asked later about his extraordinary accuracy, he simply said he practiced often and followed orders. But the story of the White Death almost ended suddenly. In March of 1940, near the end of the war, he was finally struck by a Soviet explosive bullet that hit him in the face. The impact was devastating, shattering his jaw and leaving him critically wounded. For several days, he lay unconscious as doctors struggled to keep him alive. When he finally woke up, it was March 13, 1940, the very day the Winter War ended. The man who had haunted the Soviet army had survived. His face required years of surgeries and recovery, but he eventually returned to a quiet life in Finland, once again becoming a farmer and hunter. Unlike many famous war heroes, he never sought attention or fame. He rarely spoke about his wartime experiences and lived peacefully in the Finnish countryside for decades. When journalists asked him how he felt about being called the deadliest sniper in history, his response was simple: "I only did my duty." Simo Häyhä lived a long life and passed away in 2002 at the age of 96, but the legend of the White Death still echoes through military history. To this day, soldiers and historians study his tactics, his patience, his understanding of terrain, and his ability to use the environment as the ultimate camouflage. His story also reveals something deeper about warfare. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is not advanced technology or overwhelming numbers. Sometimes it is knowledge of the land, patience, silence, and the ability to become invisible in a world where everyone else is making noise. Somewhere in the frozen forests of Finland, during one of the coldest wars in history, a single man proved that even the largest army can fear what it cannot see. And that is how a quiet farmer from Finland became the ghost of the snow, the White Death.